Welcome to a unique journey, a time-traveling odyssey back to the hazy dreams of medieval Europe, a place where every breath was a challenge and every moment held a startling surprise. Have you ever wondered if you could truly survive in a world without electricity, without the internet, without even toilet paper or a toothbrush? Close your eyes and let me guide you. You'll awaken on a straw bed, crawling with fleas, confront horrifying meals, or endure the chilling sound of rusty pliers pulling teeth without a drop of anesthetic. You will step onto village paths, awash with rivers of waste, witness brutal acts of justice by blood, and feel the crushing weight of fate upon the women of that era. Most profoundly, you will discover how beliefs, how sacred doctrines, shaped the minds and lives of people, extending far beyond any earthly law. This isn't just a story, it's a sensory experience, a profound reminder of the value of modern life. If you're ready for this extraordinary adventure, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about where you're listening from, so we can continue weaving this tapestry of knowledge and relaxation together. The church bells tolled, not the gentle chime of a smartphone alarm, but a cold blade slicing through the last vestiges of night. You jolted awake, not on a plush memory foam mattress, but on a matted grass bed, hard as stone, where the scent of damp earth and mold clung to every breath. Something prickled and crawled all over you, like 1,000 tiny needles simultaneously pricking your skin. You slapped blindly, a wave of disgust washing over you as you realized that tiny bedbugs were feasting merrily upon your very flesh. Your eyes fluttered open, struggling to define shapes in the dense, inky blackness. This was not your familiar room. It was a single-room wooden shack, its mud-daubed walls cracked and uneven, and astonishingly, not a single window to welcome even the faintest glimmer of dawn. The air hung thick and heavy, saturated with the stench of dead rats, mingled with countless other alien odors, from sour sweat to decaying mildew, a horrific symphony of putrefaction. Your chest tightened, yearning for a breath of fresh air, a whisper of cleanliness. That feeling, it was like an invisible rope cinching around you, reminding you that you weren't merely lying on a dirty bed, you were drifting into a waking nightmare of the past, a stark, unwelcome reality. The cold, you noticed, was an old friend here, wrapping its icy fingers around your bones, seeping up from the packed dirt floor. Each gust of wind, a sigh from the unseen world, wormed its way through the cracks in the hastily erected wooden planks, carrying with it not just the chill of the morning, but also the ghosts of forgotten seasons. You could hear the constant creaking of the decaying wood, a mournful song of slow surrender, as if the very structure was whispering its last goodbyes to the night. Beneath that, a more unsettling chorus began, the scratching sounds of rodents in the darkness, a frantic, unseen dance that made your skin crawl. You instinctively pulled the thin, coarse blanket closer, though it offered little solace against the pervasive chill or the creeping sensation of unseen lives sharing your space. It was like trying to stop a flood with a sieve, utterly futile. Your initial attempts to find comfort were as comical as they were desperate. You tried shifting, wriggling, seeking a softer spot on the unyielding surface, but found only more lumps and the persistent itch of unseen creatures. It was like trying to find a comfortable position on a bed of nails, each movement a fresh reminder of discomfort. Sleep, you realized, was less a gentle lullaby and more a wrestling match against the elements and the unseen inhabitants of your matted grass bed. The very idea of a mattress, soft and conforming, became a distant, almost mythical concept, a fantasy dreamt up by a different, more comfortable universe. How could anyone endure this night after night? Yet as the faint light of dawn, or perhaps merely a trick of the eye, began to paint the edges of your vision, you saw them, your fellow villagers, already stirring, their movements slow and accustomed, not a hint of surprise or discomfort on their faces. Their eyes, though weary, held a placid acceptance that was more chilling than any cold or dirt. It was as if they had been born into this discomfort, making it as natural as breathing. This newfound insight, this quiet resignation etched into the faces of those around you, was a revelation. It wasn't just your discomfort, it was the accepted state of being. You realized that privacy, that sacred, impenetrable bubble of personal space you took for granted, was a luxury as rare as dragon's breath in this age. Every cough, every rustle, every scratch was a shared experience in this single-room wooden shack. It was like living in a constant low-stakes reality show, but without the cameras or the comfort of a padded trailer. The concept of mine seemed to extend only to the meager clothes on your back, everything else belonging to the collective, including, it seemed, your peace of mind. The air itself seemed to mock your yearning for cleanliness, thick with the stench of dead rats, a smell that was not merely offensive, but almost palpable, like a rotten blanket suffocating your senses. It was a smell that seemed to cling to everything, from the rough-spun fabric of your filthy blanket to the very fibers of your hair. You could almost taste it, a metallic, earthy tang that hinted at unseen decay. This pervasive odor was a constant, grim companion, a symphony of putrefaction that played on loop, a never-ending reminder of your surroundings. Yet the villagers moved through it with the nonchalance of fish in water, seemingly impervious to its assault. You wondered if their noses simply ceased to function, a cruel mercy granted by prolonged exposure. You observed their desperate, makeshift hygiene rituals, a poignant ballet of inadequacy. Old Mistress Alara, her hands gnarled like ancient oak roots, would rub her teeth with a piece of charred wood, a futile attempt to fend off the inevitable decay. Young Thomas would meticulously pick bedbugs from his matted grass bed and flick them into the crackling fire, a tiny, personal bonfire of vengeance, but the insects would always return, like uninvited guests at a never-ending party. It was all so rudimentary, so heartbreakingly insufficient against the relentless tide of dirt and disease. You saw a woman washing her hands in a bucket of murky water, then wiping them on her already filthy blanket, a gesture of cleanliness that only served to redistribute the grime. It was like trying to clean a mud puddle with a smaller mud puddle. The methods they employed for cleansing were often more symbolic than effective, like wishing upon a star for a clean shirt. One popular tactic was using hearth ash to purify the air, scattering gray dust that merely coated existing filth in a new fine layer, like putting a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling wall. Others would diligently air out their straw mattresses under the sun to reduce bedbugs, a practice that likely sent the resilient creatures scrambling for deeper, darker crevices, only to emerge refreshed and hungrier when night fell. It was a dance of futility, a Sisyphean task against an invisible enemy. These weren't solutions, they were desperate pleas, whispered hopes against a torrent of filth. You began to understand that cleanliness wasn't a standard, it was a miracle, a concept as foreign as a flying machine to these weary souls. Your own body, once a temple of modern hygiene, now felt like a neglected ruin. The incessant itching, a relentless drumbeat against your skin, was a constant, maddening reminder. It was like being covered in invisible ants, each step a testament to your losing battle. You found yourself scratching unintentionally, sometimes so fiercely that the rough fabric of your single dirty garment chafed against your skin, threatening to break it and open pathways for infection. The dread of those tiny creatures, unseen yet ever present, made every moment an exercise in restrained agony. As the morning light, still weak and hesitant, filtered through the cracks in the single-room wooden shack, you caught glimpses of the outside world. Chickens scratching in the mud, a lone dog sniffing at a pile of refuse, children with smudged faces chasing each other. Their normalcy in this grim reality was jarring. They laughed, they played, seemingly oblivious to the grime that enveloped their lives. It was a stark contrast to your internal turmoil, like watching a brightly colored puppet show on a decaying stage. You saw the resilience, yes, but also the profound lack of awareness, the absence of any alternative to compare their lives against. They lived in a world where disease was destiny and comfort was a myth. Their innocence, in a twisted way, was their armor. Through your fitful slumber, fragmented dreams of your former life would sometimes pierce the medieval gloom. You drift into a vision of your clean, bright apartment, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the scent of fresh laundry. You'd see yourself stepping onto a plush rug, the cool, smooth ceramic of a modern toilet seat, a stream of clear, warm water flowing from a shining faucet. And oh, the mattress of soft foam, a cloud-like embrace after a long day. You'd feel the crisp, clean linen against your skin, the subtle scent of fabric softener, a fragrance as intoxicating as the rarest perfume. A personal shower, a sanctuary of steam and warmth, where water flowed freely and soap lathered richly. These were not mere amenities, but profound symbols of a forgotten world. You'd reach out, expecting to feel the soft cotton, but your hand would only meet the rough, scratchy fibers of the filthy blanket. Then, just as the dream reached its peak, a jarring sound would pull you back, perhaps the creaking of the decaying roof, a low, persistent groan, as if the very house was crying out in pain, or the frantic scampering of rats in the rafters, their tiny claws scratching a macabre tune on the old wood directly above your head. The harsh reality would crash down like an icy wave, extinguishing the gentle warmth of your dream. You were here, in this dirt, with these bugs, with this cold. The contrast was a cruel joke, a cosmic prank played upon your unsuspecting soul. Each return to consciousness was a tiny death, a shattering of comfort's illusion, leaving you stranded in a world that refused to bend to your modern sensibilities. Yet, amidst this overwhelming squalor, fleeting moments of raw, unadorned beauty would occasionally break through the gloom, like wildflowers pushing through cracked pavement. You'd catch the gentle gleam of moonlight filtering through a crack in the wall, a silver ribbon painting a fleeting pattern on the dirt floor, a silent ballet of light and shadow. Or the rhythmic chirping of crickets in the quiet night, a soothing, ancient melody that transcended the human misery, a lullaby from nature itself. These were tiny, unexpected gifts, fragments of peace in a chaotic world, reminding you that even here, beauty stubbornly persisted, waiting to be noticed by a discerning eye. They were fleeting, yes, but potent, like sips of cool water in a parched desert. But then the thought would creep in, chilling your bones more effectively than the morning air. How long could you truly survive here? Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, with the constant filth, the gnawing hunger, the ever-present threat of disease, and the utter lack of privacy slowly erode your modern sensibilities? Would your memories of cleanliness and comfort fade into distant, unbelievable fantasies? Would you, too, eventually accept the biting bugs as mere house guests, the foul air as the scent of home, the hard ground as a comfortable mattress? The chilling question echoed in the cavern of your mind. Would you simply give up, allowing this so-called medieval life to swallow your spirit into an eternal slumber devoid of dreams or desire? After a restless sleep, you suddenly had a fleeting moment of realization, a vivid flash of your soft, pristine memory foam bed, white as snow, with the fresh scent of crisp linen from the 21st century, a luxury so unattainable and unreal in this decaying straw reality. A cold thought snaked down your spine. Could you truly endure another night like this, or would you simply surrender, allowing this so-called medieval life to consume your very soul into an eternal, dreamless sleep? The journey has just begun, and the first taste is bitter indeed. A stark reminder of comfort taken for granted, a precious commodity lost to the sands of time. You opened your eyes, and your stomach was already roaring like a hungry beast. But this wasn't the usual hunger, the mild gnawing that simply calls for a missed meal. It was a primal, raw urge, far more urgent. It resonated from the depths of your very being, demanding release. Your legs, still stiff from the matted grass bed, trembled as you pushed yourself up, yet even finding a suitable place to relieve yourself proved to be a matter of desperate survival in this bygone era. The very act of preserving personal dignity in a public sphere had abruptly transformed into a darkly comical struggle, a cruel joke of fate that you could never have possibly foreseen in your wildest modern dreams. It was as if the universe itself was playing a mischievous trick, stripping away every layer of your contemporary comfort, leaving you naked to the harsh realities of a world long past. The first rays of an anemic sun, timid as a shy child, began to filter through the cracks in the wooden walls, painting weak, dusty stripes on the dirt floor. With the light came a harsh awakening. The realization that there was no flushing toilet here, no porcelain throne awaiting your convenience. The modern luxury of a private, sanitized commode was a concept so alien it might as well have belonged to another galaxy. The simple act of answering nature's call, a seamless, thoughtless part of your previous life, had become an elaborate, anxiety-ridden ritual. Your modern sensibilities screamed in protest, but your body, a more ancient, primitive master, offered no such intellectual debates. It simply demanded. You tentatively stepped outside, the cool, damp earth squelching beneath your bare feet. The air, though marginally fresher than inside the shack, still carried that pervasive, thick stench, an unseen blanket woven from countless unpleasantries. It was a smell that seemed to thicken the very air, so dense you could almost taste its acrid bitterness on your tongue, a grim flavor of existence itself. Your eyes scanned the immediate surroundings, a desperate search for anything resembling discretion. But discretion, like a forgotten language, seemed to have no place here. The village, a cluster of similar shacks, offered no hidden nooks or secluded corners. Every path was open, every corner visible. It was a stage where life's most intimate acts played out in full view. Then you saw them, the facilities, not gleaming stalls or private cubicles, but communal spots, often just slightly away from the main path, marked by faint depressions in the ground or a cluster of taller weeds. There, you witnessed the unspoken rules of public medieval hygiene. People would simply find a spot, turn their backs, often more symbolically than effectively, and carry out their business. It was like a crude, unchoreographed dance, performed with a surprising lack of self-consciousness by those who had known no other way. You saw an elderly woman squatting openly by a ditch, her face as placid as if she were knitting. A young boy, no older than 5, relieved himself against the side of a communal well, his eyes wide with innocent curiosity, unaware of the profound irony unfolding before your very eyes. Your initial reaction was a violent recoil of shame, a deep burning flush that crept up your neck. You, who had always valued your privacy like a precious jewel, were now faced with surrendering it utterly. The concept of toilet paper, that soft, absorbent miracle, was, of course, a distant luxury here. Instead, you observed the locals using whatever organic material was at hand. Dried leaves, rough handfuls of rotting straw, or even smoothed river stones. The very thought made your stomach churn. It was a truly humbling experience, a stripping away of every modern comfort, leaving you vulnerable and exposed. You tried a dry leaf, its rough surface scratching rather than cleaning, a stark reminder of how much you took for granted. The lack of proper sanitation meant that every interaction, every passing breeze carried the unseen particles of human waste, a constant microscopic threat. The most shocking realization was the casual disposal of waste. You remembered the stories, the chilling details. No, there was no flushing toilet, no intricate plumbing systems, just the crude reality of necessity. The most common method involved a simple wooden bucket, often kept inside the shacks, and when it was full, or when the urge simply became too strong to ignore, the contents were unceremoniously emptied directly onto the public pathways, often accompanied by a perfunctory, almost ritualistic shout of, "Look out below," or "Gardez l'eau," for those in more French-influenced regions. It was a chillingly effective, albeit disgusting, way of ensuring pedestrian awareness. You watched in horrified fascination as a woman, her face impassive, tilted a wooden bucket from her doorway, a dark viscous stream cascading onto the very path you had walked just moments before. The village lanes, once imagined as quaint cobblestone arteries, were in reality little more than open sewage channels, winding veins of filth that crisscrossed the community. You saw children, thin and pale, playing near these impromptu canals, their laughter echoing eerily against the backdrop of human effluvidia. This was their playground, their daily landscape. The sheer casualness of it all, the complete normalization of such unspeakable conditions, slowly began to chip away at your ingrained revulsion. Shame, that acute burning sensation, started to dull, replaced by a growing sense of weariness, a form of emotional callousing. What was the point of embarrassment when everyone around you lived in the same inescapable reality? You found yourself adapting, instinctively scanning for clear patches of ground, developing an almost primal awareness of your surroundings. It was a bitter pill to swallow, this forced acceptance of the grotesque, yet swallow it must you, for survival dictated it.
You observed the villagers, their faces etched with the lines of hardship, engaging in casual conversation directly beside these flowing rivers. They gossiped, they bartered, they shared stories of the harvest or the latest local intrigue, all while the faint, undeniable odor of decay hung heavy in the air. It was a bizarre tableau, as if the act of relieving oneself had become as mundane and communal as sharing a loaf of bread. A group of women, their hands busy with mending, chattered idly as a stream of liquid, unmistakably human in origin, trickled past their feet. They didn't flinch, didn't comment. It was simply part of the background noise of life. This collective indifference was perhaps the most unsettling aspect, a stark demonstration of how environment shapes perception. They had built an immunity to disgust, a psychological defense mechanism against an omnipresent foe. The contrast with your own time was a gaping chasm, a canyon between worlds. You remembered the sterile gleam of public restrooms, the reassuring flush of water, the soft rustle of toilet paper unspooling from a holder, the blissful solitude of a locked stall, the clean scent of disinfectant, and the effortless disposal of waste. These weren't just conveniences. They were symbols of a society that valued hygiene, privacy, and public health. They were silent guardians of dignity. You could step into a restroom in your world, perform a purely biological function, and emerge feeling unburdened, unobserved, and perfectly clean. Here, every trip was an exposé. Every release a public declaration. The freedom you once took for granted, the quiet, unspoken liberty of your own private ablutions, now shone like a distant star, brilliant and unattainable. You found yourself reflecting on the sheer resilience of these people, their capacity to endure what you, a creature of comfort, found unbearable. They did not rail against the lack of sanitation, they simply lived within its confines, their lives a testament to adaptation. They found dignity in small gestures, in the shared burdens, in the simple fact of surviving another day. Perhaps their standards were lower, but their fortitude was undeniably higher. And in that you found a strange, grudging respect for their unyielding spirit, a spirit forged in the crucible of constant discomfort and endless grime. As dusk began to paint the sky with hues of bruised purple and faded orange, the air seemed to cool slightly, yet the pervasive stench, though muted, still lingered, a stubborn ghost refusing to depart. You lay down on your matted grass bed, trying to banish the horrifying images and the oppressive smells of the day from your mind. You thought of your modern world's clean water sources, the gleaming sanitized bathrooms. They felt like miracles now, like visions from a utopian future. This harsh reality made you understand, with a clarity that stung, the profound fragility of health and life when constantly enveloped by an environment of ceaseless contamination, and how the very definition of privacy, a concept you had once deemed universal, was in fact a fluid, ever-changing boundary, shifting dramatically across the vast expanse of time. This part of the journey reveals that dignity, like fresh water, was a rare luxury, an unspoken privilege of your own era, a treasure you would never again take for granted, not after living through this grimy, humbling reality. After a restless night, where sleep offered little more than fleeting, dusty dreams, a gnawing hunger began to creep in, insidious as a shadow. This was not the gentle pang of a skipped meal or the polite rumble of an empty stomach. This was a visceral, cellular gnawing, like a relentless demon clawing at your very insides, demanding to be sated. You had to find breakfast, a fundamental human need. Yet here, in this unforgiving age, a meal was not a source of pleasure or nourishment. It was a battle, a high-stakes gamble with death itself. Every single mouthful was a fragile promise, laced with the unsettling anxiety of what hidden dangers might lurk within its meager offering, a silent prayer for survival with each desperate swallow. The morning air, thin and biting, seemed to carry the scent of desperation, mingling with the stale, earthy odors of the village. You joined the small queue, a silent procession of stoic faces, moving towards the communal hearth. There, a large iron cauldron perpetually bubbled, spewing forth a thick, gray steam that hinted at its contents. This was the source of the day's sustenance for most villagers, a concoction known simply as pottage. It was a dish born of necessity, a culinary Frankenstein monster stitched together from whatever meager scraps could be scrounged. The origins of its ingredients were often a whispered mystery, a dark secret shared only between the cook and the fickle hand of fate. Perhaps it was a handful of dried peas, salvaged from last season's meager harvest, or a few forgotten oats, swept from the corners of a dusty granary. Sometimes, if the gods smiled, there might be a few wild herbs, their bitter tang barely masking the underlying blandness. But mostly, it was just gruel, a thick, unappealing sludge that promised little joy, but crucially offered a temporary truce with the beast of hunger. As you received your portion, ladled unceremoniously into a rough wooden bowl, the sight alone was enough to quell any lingering appetite you might have harbored from your modern life. It was a thick, viscous soup, more akin to paste than broth, utterly devoid of vibrant color or inviting aroma. The texture was lumpy, a testament to its indiscriminate collection of whatever fell into the pot. There was no fragrant steam, no enticing sizzle, just a dull, earthy odor that spoke of desperation. You instinctively sought out familiar spices, a dash of salt or a hint of pepper, but spices were the stuff of legends here, whispered about by traveling merchants but never truly seen on a peasant's table. The complete absence of seasoning rendered everything bland, tasteless, a culinary wasteland where flavor was a forgotten language. It was like trying to enjoy a painting made entirely of gray, a visual and gustatory assault on your pampered senses. Your companion for this morning meal was Alara, a woman whose face, though young, already bore the deep etchings of relentless toil, like a map of endless suffering. She sat beside you, her eyes sunken but sharp, watching as you hesitantly brought a spoonful of the pottage to your lips. You swallowed, the thick, unappealing gruel sliding down your throat like liquid mud. It tasted of nothing and everything. The faint tang of boiled greens, the earthy whisper of grain, all blended into a uniform, insipid flavor that seemed to exist solely to fill space. It was food for mere existence, not for pleasure. You then took a bite of the coarse bread, hard as a brick, a fortress against dental comfort. It felt like chewing on hardened clay, threatening to chip your already aching teeth. Each bite was a wrestling match, a small victory of persistence over palatal despair. The act of eating, for them, was always tinged with a silent dread.
You could see it in their eyes, a fleeting shadow of fear that flickered across their faces with every mouthful. They ate quickly, efficiently, as if trying to outrun an unseen predator. You found yourself mirroring their anxiety, wondering, with each bite, if this very sustenance might carry the seeds of illness, or worse, the cold embrace of death. It was a macabre lottery, where every meal was a ticket, and the prize could be a crippling fever or an agonizing farewell. The air, though filled with the clatter of spoons against wood, hummed with this unspoken fear, a constant companion at every humble table. You recalled the hushed, grief-stricken tale of the Hawthorne family, neighbors from the cluster of huts near yours. Driven to desperation by the gnawing beast of hunger, they had dared to venture into the shadowed woods, hoping to find salvation in the form of the wild mushrooms. A few plump, unassuming fungi promising a temporary reprieve from starvation. But the forest, ever a treacherous mistress, had played its cruel trick. The mushrooms, vibrant and appealing, were a silent poison. One by one, the entire family had succumbed, their bodies found sprawled on the cold earth, their last breaths exhaled in a sleep that knew no waking. It was a chilling testament to the fragile line between sustenance and oblivion, a line so often blurred in this unforgiving age. Or the countless stories of green molded bread, its insidious bloom a harbinger of death, that had mercilessly claimed the lives of countless souls, leaving behind only the agonizing cramps of empty stomachs and the hollow, vacant stare of orphaned eyes. These weren't mere cautionary tales. They were the daily news, etched into the collective memory, a constant reminder of the unseen enemies lurking in every morsel. The thought alone was enough to make the meager pottage in your bowl feel like a potential death sentence. Yet amidst this stark reality, a grim kind of creativity flourished, born from the crucible of extreme deprivation. The medieval peasant, it seemed, was a master of grotesque culinary improvisation. You heard whispers, half jokes about using wall moss as a spice, a rather earthy, gritty addition, one might imagine, offering more in the way of visual interest than actual flavor. Others spoke of scraping tree bark for a desperate attempt at fiber, an act of true gastronomic despair. It was like trying to bake a gourmet cake using only dust and cobwebs, a testament to their unwavering spirit of survival, however unappealing the results might be. The sheer audacity of these culinary innovations was both horrifying and darkly amusing, a testament to humanity's boundless inventiveness when faced with the void of hunger. You found yourself almost admiring their resourcefulness, even as your stomach rebelled. You remembered the casual ease with which you used to wander the aisles of a modern supermarket, a veritable cornucopia of choices, each item glistening with the promise of safety and flavor. The sheer abundance, the vibrant colors, the carefully printed labels guaranteeing freshness, it felt like a dream, a boundless landscape of edible delights. You could choose between organic kale or conventional spinach, debate the merits of sourdough versus rye, all without a single thought of hidden toxins or gnawing worms. The very act of having a choice, beyond mere survival, was an unimaginable luxury here. Now, holding this bowl of pottage, every memory of a simple sandwich, a comforting bowl of soup from a can, or even just a clean glass of tap water seemed like an unattainable miracle, a taste of paradise that belonged to another existence entirely. You recognized that the ability to eat well, to eat safely, to choose what you consumed without fear was a profound privilege, one you had completely overlooked until now. The fear wasn't just of poison or mold. It was also the unseen, the microscopic menace. You imagined invisible germs, mists of disease, clinging to every grain of barley in your pottage, lurking within every lumpy potato. The knowledge of bacteria, of viruses, that unseen army of death, was a burden only you carried in this ignorant age. You saw their resigned acceptance, their simple explanations of God's will or bad humors for outbreaks that you knew were caused by contaminated food and water. This quiet ignorance for them was a form of bliss, a shield against the existential terror you felt with every spoonful. It was a chilling realization. Sometimes what you don't know can hurt you, but what you do know can haunt you. As you finished the last morsel, a faint sense of fullness, thin as a ghost, settled in your belly. But it wasn't the satisfying warmth of a truly nourishing meal. It was the temporary quiet of a temporarily silenced beast. The hunger merely postponed, not conquered. The realization that this was merely the first battle of the day, with many more to come, weighed heavily on your spirit. You looked at the other villagers, their faces already turning back to their chores, their eyes holding that familiar, distant weariness. They had survived breakfast. Another small victory in a relentless war against oblivion. As night descended, the air seemed to soften just a fraction, yet the gnawing specter of hunger, both physical and psychological, lingered like an unwelcome guest, weaving itself into the very fabric of your dreams and every waking breath. You lay down, your stomach still feeling strangely hollow, yet in your mind the vivid image of a fully stocked refrigerator, its shelves overflowing with fresh produce and packaged delights, and the warm glow of a 24/7 convenience store beckoned. How incredibly luxurious that world now seemed. Perhaps the simple act of eating your fill, of having the freedom to choose your food without the constant shadow of contamination, was a miracle that these people of this era could not even in their wildest imaginings, truly comprehend. As this journey unfolds, you realize that even a simple meal was a luxury many could only dream of, a silent battle for mere existence, a daily testament to the indomitable will to survive. After a breakfast that felt more like a grudging truce than a satisfying meal, you began to sense your body transforming into a battleground, a canvas scored with the invisible lines of conflict. Not from the honest wounds of labor, nor the accidental scrapes of daily life, but from a silent, relentless war, the ongoing struggle against unseen enemies, uninvited guests, who had taken up permanent residence upon your very skin. Each morning, as you grudgingly stirred from the shallow embrace of sleep, you weren't merely facing the day's harsh realities. You were confronting a literal army of parasites, joyously feasting upon your flesh, as if your once free kingdom had been utterly invaded, its borders breached by a microscopic, relentless horde. The first hint of this intimate invasion often came not with a visual shock, but with a maddening, persistent itch. It would begin subtly, a whisper on your scalp, then spread like wildfire, 1,000 tiny pinpricks dancing across your skin. You were acutely aware that you possessed only a single set of garments, coarse and ill-fitting, which you quickly learned were never washed. The very thought was enough to make your modern skin crawl, like 1,000 phantom insects parading across your back. This garment, a second skin of misery, was perpetually filthy, coated with grime that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. It wasn't just dirt. It was a composite of sweat, dust, dried mud, and the accumulated detritus of days, weeks, perhaps even months of unwashed existence. It clung to you like a second, less pleasant shadow, a constant reminder of your new, unhygienic reality. The moment you became truly acquainted with your new, unwelcome tenants was unforgettable. You felt something move in your hair. Then again, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift. A quick, surreptitious scratch, and then you saw it. A tiny, translucent creature scurrying across your fingertip. Lice, and not just one, but what felt like an entire convention. Their presence was a constant, maddening torment, 1,000 tiny dancers performing a relentless jig on your scalp. Then came the others, the silent partners in this grim ecosystem, the insidious fleas, leaping with acrobatic grace from the straw of your bed, or the village animals, and perhaps even the occasional dog tick, burrowing deep into your skin, a tiny bloated vampire enjoying its feast. Your skin, once smooth and pampered, had become rough and bumpy, a landscape of perpetual irritation, constantly itching, a maddening symphony of discomfort. And with the scratching, the inevitable happened. Sores began to appear. Small, angry red dots at first, then weeping, open wounds that refused to heal, invitations for every infection imaginable. It was a vicious cycle, a biological trap from which there seemed no escape, like a fly caught in a spider's web, struggling in vain. The feeling of being dirty to your very bones was profound, a pervasive sense of uncleanliness that permeated every fiber of your being. No matter how much you might have yearned for a bath, for the liberating sensation of hot water and cleansing soap, it was an impossible dream, a phantom limb of your former life. Even mental effort couldn't wash away the grime. You tried to imagine yourself clean, but the persistent itch, the faint, sour odor clinging to your skin always dragged you back to the squalid reality. A peculiar sense of shame often crept over you, a discomfort born of your modern sensibilities whenever you felt the urge to scratch. You'd try to do it discreetly, a quick, furtive movement. But in this world, such modesty was utterly pointless. Everyone, it seemed, was afflicted. You saw it in the unconscious movements of the villagers. Old man Petrus, his hand constantly raking through his thinning hair, eyes vacant. Young Agnes, her fingers deftly plucking something unseen from her brother's collar. These were the public rituals of scratching, performed openly and without apology, as common as breathing or the ringing of the church bells. No one batted an eye, no one commented. It was simply the accepted way of life, a collective, silent suffering that bound them together. It was like a secret handshake of the damned, understood by all, but spoken by none. You heard the whispered stories of their treatments, methods passed down through generations, born more of superstition than science. There was the common practice of smearing pig fat onto the affected areas, a thick, greasy balm that might have suffocated a few parasites, but left the skin feeling even fouler and greasier. Some advocated for poultices of strange, noxious leaves gathered from the shadowed edges of the forest. Their purported healing powers often outweighed their unknown, potentially harmful side effects. It was a gamble,
a desperate roll of the dice with remedies that offered little hope and sometimes even more misery. You often wondered if the cure was worse than the disease, a grim joke played by fate. Then came the morning that truly solidified your place within this grim ecosystem. You awoke to an unbearable itching, an inferno raging beneath your skin. When you looked down, your arms and legs were covered in angry red welts, small raised mountains of irritation. A chill ran down your spine. Later that day, you overheard the hushed whispers of the villagers, their faces drawn with fear. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Ghost scabies, a local term for severe, persistent scabies, believed by some to be caused by spirits, or louse fever. The rumor spread through the small community like a brush fire across dry tinder, igniting panic in its wake. It was a terror you understood with sickening clarity, knowing the unseen enemy at play. Suddenly, the subtle shifts in social dynamics began. Your usual companions, the ones with whom you shared the meager pottage and exchanged weary glances, started to subtly distance themselves. Their eyes, which once held a glimmer of shared hardship, now reflected not sympathy, but a chilling fear. They would turn away slightly when you approached, their conversations hushed to an unintelligible murmur. You were no longer just a villager, you were a potential carrier, a walking threat. You found yourself pushed to the periphery of conversations, an invisible wall erecting itself between you and the others. You became isolated within your own village, a pariah in your own small world, all because of these tiny, relentless creatures devouring your body. This social ostracization, this cold shoulder from those you had come to rely on, was a pain far deeper and more agonizing than any bite on your skin. It was a wound to your very soul, a stark reminder of the fragile nature of acceptance. In a strange, almost macabre twist, you began to personify these parasites. They weren't just bugs. They were your eternal residents, your most loyal companions. They were always there, clinging to your clothes, burrowing into your skin, more faithful than any fleeting friend. They demanded nothing but sustenance and offered nothing but discomfort. They were a constant, itching reminder of your new reality, an inescapable part of your medieval existence, closer than your own shadow. This morbid anthropomorphism was perhaps a coping mechanism, a way to find a shred of ironic humor in a situation that otherwise offered none. They were, in their own way, a twisted form of intimate connection, a grotesque symbiosis. As evening draped its heavy cloak over the village, the incessant itching continued its torment, an incessant maddening symphony against the backdrop of quiet despair. You lay down on your matted grass bed, the rough straw scratching against your inflamed skin. You closed your eyes, desperately trying to conjure the sensation of submerging yourself in a warm, steaming bathtub, its surface shimmering with the promise of cleanliness. You pictured the rich, fragrant lather of soap, the soft embrace of a fluffy, absorbent towel. It was a beautiful illusion, a tantalizing mirage in the desert of your discomfort. But it was just that, a fleeting fantasy, a wish whispered to the unhearing heavens. You understood, with a clarity born of painful experience, that in this era Cleanliness was not a choice, not even a readily available option. It was a miraculous concept, a luxury so profound that only the highest nobility dared to even dream of it. The thought haunted you. Could you possibly preserve the purity of your spirit, your inner sanctuary, when your physical body and the world around you were succumbing to decay with each passing day? This segment of our journey shows how even the most basic comfort became a distant dream, replaced by a constant itchy battle, a silent war waged upon the very canvas of your being.
You had, by now, come to an uneasy truce with the constant companionship of fleas and the pervasive, earthy stench of the village. Your senses, once so refined, had dulled into a resigned acceptance, like an old, worn tapestry. But there was one indignity, one truly difficult pill to swallow that lingered, sharp and persistent, the very sight of your own smile. Each time you dared to part your lips, to utter a polite greeting, or offer a fleeting moment of camaraderie, it wasn't merely the searing ache from your decaying teeth that presented itself, it was a profound, creeping wave of shame, a raw self-consciousness that burrowed deep into your spirit. Your face, you realized, with a chilling clarity, had become a living map of deprivation, each carious tooth a painful landmark, etching the relentless, brutal passage of time onto your very being, a silent testament to the harsh realities of this bygone era. The morning light, what little of it managed to pierce the perpetual gloom of the shack, seemed to magnify every flaw, every dark stain in your mouth. You ran your tongue over your teeth, a grim, self-inflicted inventory. The once smooth, pearly surfaces of your modern existence were now a crumbling ruin, a jagged landscape of decay. The very thought of a toothbrush and toothpaste, those shining symbols of modern oral hygiene, felt as fantastical as a dragon's breath, a distant memory from a forgotten age. You remembered the minty freshness, the satisfying foam, the effortless glide of bristles cleaning away the remnants of the day. Here, such tools were the stuff of dreams, unheard of luxuries. Instead, you quickly learned the local oral care rituals, which were less about hygiene and more about desperate, often painful damage control. Some villagers would chew on twigs from certain trees, their fibrous ends meant to act as rudimentary brushes, though they often splintered, leaving behind uncomfortable shards. Others swore by rinsing their mouths with sour vinegar, a caustic concoction meant to cleanse, but which often left your mouth feeling stripped and raw, like gargling with battery acid. It was a painful, often futile exercise, a desperate attempt to fend off the inevitable decay that marched relentlessly through every mouth in the village. You quickly understood that even basic oral health was an unattainable luxury, a privilege only granted to those living centuries in the future. Your teeth, once a source of pride, were now a grim testament to this lack. They were chipped, crumbling, and rotting in their sockets, some blackened hulks, others reduced to jagged shards that lacerated your tongue with every careless movement. Your gums were a perpetual landscape of inflammation, swollen and tender, bleeding at the slightest provocation, like angry wounds refusing to heal. The throbbing ache was constant, a relentless pulsating drumbeat that began deep within your jaw and radiated outwards, up to your temples, settling behind your eyes like a persistent shadow. It was a pain that gnawed at you without pause, affecting your ability to think clearly, to focus on the simplest tasks, and, perhaps most cruelly, to find any respite in sleep. Even the fleeting promise of slumber was often shattered by a sudden electric jolt of agony from a particularly sensitive nerve. The sensation of self-consciousness when you smiled, or rather, tried to smile, was immense. You'd catch a glimpse of your reflection in a pail of water, a distorted, wavering image, and your heart would sink. Your once bright, confident grin was now a grotesque grimace, a jagged, dark cavern of decay. You started avoiding mirrors, avoiding eye contact, even avoiding open-mouthed laughter. It was a profound loss, the ability to express joy freely, to share a genuine, unburdened smile with another human being. Your smile, once a bridge to connection, had become a barrier. You heard the hushed cautionary tales from the older villagers, passed down like grim fables, stories of people losing their teeth long before their time, their faces collapsing inward, transforming into hollowed-out masks. You saw the evidence all around you, the toothless grins of individuals barely past their prime, their sunken cheeks and gaunt expressions a testament to the brutal realities of their diet and lack of care. Early tooth loss wasn't just an aesthetic concern, it severely reduced one's ability to chew and swallow, leading to further malnutrition and weakening an already fragile body. Even more terrifying were the grim tales of death by infection, where a simple tooth abscess left untreated would fester and spread, claiming lives with agonizing slowness. It was a chilling reminder that a tiny hole in your tooth could easily become a gateway to the grave, a whispered secret of mortality.
The prospect of tooth extraction was, in itself, a special kind of medieval torture. If the pain became unbearable, your only recourse was the village barber surgeon, a man whose skills typically extended to trimming beards and perhaps rudimentary bloodletting, rather than intricate dental procedures. His primary tool for tooth removal? A rusty pair of pliers, often used for pulling nails from wood or perhaps for wrestling stubborn bolts. The procedure was performed without any form of pain relief, no numbing agents, no soothing elixirs, just raw, unadulterated agony. The patient was usually held down by strong villagers, their screams echoing through the small, crowded space, a public spectacle of suffering. The sheer luck of escaping such a brutal encounter with your life, or even with the infection that often followed, was a gamble few would willingly take. You understood why many preferred to suffer the constant ache rather than face the barbarity of extraction. The shame grew, a heavy cloak draped over your spirit. You instinctively began to avoid talking and smiling, a silent withdrawal from social interaction. Every time you were forced to open your mouth, whether to speak a few words or attempt a polite, strained smile, it wasn't just the searing pain that assaulted you, it was the unavoidable waft of foul breath and the grotesque sight of your jagged, rotting teeth stained by time and neglect. You felt acutely aware of every breath you took, every word you uttered, as if your very presence was an offense. The once simple joys of romantic love or social interaction became immense, insurmountable challenges. How could you share an intimate moment, a whispered secret, when your breath carried the scent of decay and your smile was a horrifying landscape? You saw young lovers in the village, shy glances exchanged, but you noticed their lips rarely met. Was it the fear of infection, or simply the unpleasant reality of their partners' mouths? You imagined offering a tender kiss, only to be met with a subtle recoil, a barely perceptible flinch that spoke volumes. Social gatherings, once a source of light-hearted chatter, became abbreviated, awkward encounters. People would subtly step back, shorten their conversations, their eyes darting away from your mouth, their noses subtly wrinkling. It was a silent judgment, a constant, unspoken reminder of your compromised state, transforming the very act of smiling, that quintessential expression of happiness, into a source of profound anguish and embarrassment. One evening, you watched a young couple, their faces alight with affection, sharing a hushed conversation. The girl, Ilara's cousin, giggled, then quickly covered her mouth with her hand, a reflex born not of shyness but perhaps of habit or self-consciousness. The young man, in turn, leaned closer, but his gaze seemed to linger on her covered mouth, not her eyes. The subtle ballet of avoidance, of veiled discomfort, was heartbreaking to witness. Their youthful innocence was already being tainted by the grim realities of their decaying bodies, a bittersweet reminder that even the deepest affections struggled to bloom amidst the thorns of physical hardship. You found yourself wishing, fiercely, for a simple breath mint, a tube of toothpaste, anything to bridge the chasm of their innocent affections and a harsh reality of their breath. As night descended, the relentless toothache began its nocturnal torture anew, each throbbing pulse in your gum a deafening drumbeat, echoing the frantic rhythm of a battle you were slowly losing. You yearned, with a desperation that was almost physical, for a simple painkiller, a tiny white pill from your own time, or an appointment with a modern dentist, a skilled professional armed with drills and anesthetics. But these were mere figments of a forgotten dream, ethereal whispers from a life now separated by centuries. You understood with a clarity that pierced your very soul that a smile was far more than a mere expression of joy. It was a profound mirror, reflecting not just one's health, but also one's very place in the rigid hierarchy of society. In this era, a smile was less a blessing and more a heavy burden, an enduring agony, a constant, silent testament to the countless small comforts that had been stripped away from your existence. This segment of your journey whispers a truth. Sometimes the greatest pain is not in the body, but in the lost dignity of a simple smile, a joy taken for granted in your own world, a silent scream against the cruel indifference of time. The piercing shriek of the overseer's whistle ripped through the pre-dawn stillness like a jagged claw tearing through the fabric of night. It was a sound that didn't merely stir you from your rotting bed of straw, it jolted you awake with the primal terror of a hunted animal, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Your muscles, already stiff and aching from the parasitic bites that tattooed your skin, seized up in a cold electric spasm. This wasn't the gentle call to a new day. This was the brutal summons to a life sentence, an unbreakable chain binding you to the unforgiving earth. You stumbled out, your body a marionette pulled by unseen, malevolent strings, knowing that the real agony lay not in the physical torment, but in the crushing realization that your very existence was defined by a single, inescapable truth. You were a cog in a vast, merciless machine, a prisoner of circumstance, with each swing of the hoe, each straining lift etching deeper the indelible mark of a destiny from which there was no escape. The air outside your miserable shack was a raw, biting assault, thick with the damp chill of a perpetual morning. The village, a cluster of similar hovels, was already a tableau of silent, weary figures, their movements sluggish and mechanical, like automatons wound up for another day of endless grinding. You could hear the muffled thud of bare feet on the sodden earth, the occasional hacking cough that seemed to resonate with the very weariness of the land itself. This was the silent ritual of the dawn, a grim procession towards the vast open fields that stretched out like an indifferent brown sea under the bruised pre-dawn sky. You joined this procession, your body screaming in protest, a chorus of aches and pains that seemed to echo the complaints of 1,000 generations. The exhaustion was a numbing tide, a heavy blanket woven from countless sleepless nights and relentless physical demands. It smothered every thought, every sensation, leaving you feeling strangely detached, as though your spirit had temporarily abandoned your physical shell, leaving it to endure the day alone. Your body, once a finely tuned machine, now felt like a creaking, rickety contraption, each joint protesting with a sharp, grating sound, your bones crackling like decaying wood under pressure, threatening to splinter with each strenuous movement. It was a macabre puppet show with your muscles as the strings pulled by an unseen, unyielding force. The sheer thought of the day stretching endlessly before you, a vast flat plain of unending labor, was enough to make your spirit quail, to send a shiver of dread down your spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. The pervasive fear, a constant gnawing presence, was not just of the physical pain that awaited, but of the ever-present threat of being replaced. In this brutal feudal hierarchy, productivity was your sole currency, your only shield against the abyss of destitution. If you faltered, if your body gave way, if you couldn't meet the Lord's demanding quotas, there were always others, the younger, stronger, hungrier, lurking in the shadows, ready to seize your meager portion of existence. The specter of starvation hovered over every furrow you plowed, every seed you sowed, a silent overseer whispering threats of destitution into your very soul. And beyond the relentless gnaw of hunger, there was the ever-present shadow of punishment, a brutal reminder of the Lord's absolute and unquestionable power. A slow hand, a missed day, a whispered complaint, any transgression, no matter how minor, could lead to a public whipping, a stint in the dreaded stocks, or, in the worst cases, outright expulsion from the village, a death sentence delivered not by blade, but by banishment. This constant vigilance, this agonizing need to appear productive and strong, even when your body screamed in protest, added yet another layer of invisible burden to your already aching shoulders, a psychological weight as heavy as any stone. The tales of the Lord's inherent ruthlessness were not mere whispers in the communal hall. They were the very air you breathed, etched into the weary faces of the villagers like lines on an ancient map. Lord Alaric, the current master of these vast, unforgiving lands, was a man whose generosity was as scarce as summer snow, and whose justice was as swift and arbitrary as a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. You had heard chilling tales of families dispossessed for a single failed harvest, their homes burned, their children scattered to the winds. Young men full of nascent dreams were pressed into military service, never to return, simply because they dared to question a Lord's decree, their lives extinguished like candles in the wind. The injustice in the division of the spoils was a bitter, undiluted poison, swallowed daily by every serf. You, the backbone of this feudal system, the very creators of life, tilled the soil, broke your backs under the scorching sun and the biting wind, coaxing sustenance from the stubborn earth, nurturing the golden grain with your sweat and tears. Yet, when the harvest came, the vast majority, a veritable ocean of wealth, went directly to the Lord's granaries. You, the true architects of this bounty, the very ones who brought forth life from the soil, were left with little more than the leftover husks, the inedible chaff, a grim, mocking semblance of sustenance. It was a perverse alchemy. You produced gold from dust, and they gave you dust for your efforts. The tools themselves were not merely instruments of labor. They were an extension of this very brutality, primitive and unforgiving. The plows were heavy, unwieldy wooden contraptions, their rudimentary iron tips barely scratching the surface of the hardened soil, demanding Herculean strength from those who guided them. Scythes, though effective in their primary purpose, were also treacherous, their sharp, unyielding blades ever eager to draw blood from an unwary hand or a momentarily tired arm, a constant threat of injury. Every single day was a perilous dance with injury, a constant threat of a slipped grip or a misjudged swing, each movement a potential gateway to crippling pain or even permanent disability. You saw the villagers, their hands gnarled and scarred, missing fingers or bearing the telltale marks of old unhealed wounds, like living museums of agricultural accidents, each scar a story of hardship. The complete reliance on human labor meant that every task, from breaking ground to grinding grain, was a testament to raw, unadulterated physical exertion. There were no machines, no clever contraptions to ease the burden, just the endless repetitive grind of flesh against earth, bone against rock, a slow, agonizing process that chipped away at your very essence. As the sun, a relentless golden orb, climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the open fields with an almost malevolent intensity, your muscles screamed in protest, each contraction a fresh agony, a searing fire burning through your limbs. Sweat, cold and clammy, plastered your coarse tunic to your skin, mixing with the ever-present dust to form a gritty paste like sandpaper against your raw flesh. The monotony was maddening, row after row, furrow after furrow, an endless mind-numbing repetition that dulled the mind even as it systematically broke the body. You watched the other serfs, their movements robotic, their faces blank with exhaustion, their spirits seemingly as worn and tattered as their threadbare clothes. There was no hope of advancement, no glimmer of a ladder to climb, no conceivable escape from this endless, soul-crushing cycle of labor. Your fate was sealed, written in the very soil you tilled, destined to die on the same unforgiving patch of earth where you were born, leaving behind only the legacy of your ending toil for the next generation of serfs, caught in the same relentless current. When night finally descended, a merciful black curtain drawn over the brutal landscape, you would stumble back to your shack, your body a symphony of aches and pains. Every muscle screamed, every joint protested, a painful chorus of misery that sang you to your temporary repose. You'd collapse onto your matted grass bed, too exhausted even to properly tend to the gnawing parasites that still feasted upon your flesh. Sleep would claim you quickly, a heavy, dreamless oblivion, a temporary death from the waking nightmare. Yet sometimes, in the deepest troughs of this bone-weary exhaustion, fleeting fragments of your former life, vibrant and impossible, would pierce the oppressive darkness like distant, unattainable stars. You'd find yourself transported in a dream, sitting in a bright, spacious room, bathed in the soft, welcoming glow of electric lights. The air would be filled with the intoxicating sweet scent of new books, their pages crisp and unblemished, promising untold adventures and boundless knowledge. Before you, a kind, patient teacher would be smiling, his face alight with a gentle wisdom, his voice calm and clear, explaining complex ideas with effortless grace. The profound feeling of learning, of expanding your mind, of absorbing new concepts was utterly miraculous, a pure, unadulterated joy that resonated deep within your very soul. You felt your mind, long dormant under the crushing weight of manual labor, awaken and stretch, eager to consume every word, every idea, every nuance of understanding.
It was a freedom, an exhilaration unlike anything you had experienced in this brutal, unthinking world of endless toil. The very concept of intellectual pursuit, of knowledge for knowledge's sake, was a cherished fantasy, a vibrant contrast to the dull, repetitive realities of your sun-up to sundown days. But then, as if a cruel, unseen hand had yanked you by the hair, a harsh, guttural sound would cut through the sweet illusion. The barking voice of the overseer, cold and unfeeling as a winter wind, would slice through the early morning mist, pulling you violently from that sweet dream, dragging you back to the grim reality. Reality would crash down like a bucket of icy water, drenching you in its brutal, undeniable truth. Another day of tilling, another day without escape, your precious dreams of knowledge dissipating like morning mist in the face of the rising sun. The gentle hum of intellectual curiosity, the yearning for understanding would be replaced by the grating, rhythmic crunch of the plowshare tearing through the stubborn, unyielding earth, a grim, undeniable reminder of your inescapable, unchangeable fate. You lay there, your body throbbing with 1,000 aches, your mind heavy with exhaustion, the lingering scent of damp earth and animal waste clinging to your senses. You understood, with a chilling clarity that settled deep in your bones, that work in this era was not a career, not a chosen path to fulfillment, but a profound, unending life sentence. A sentence with no end date, no hope of parole, and no conceivable future beyond the endless cycle of sowing and reaping. The very idea of intellectual freedom, of the boundless choices in modern professions, of the simple ability to pursue knowledge for its own sake, suddenly shone brighter than any jewel, more precious than any king's ransom. It was a gift you had never truly appreciated, a fundamental liberty you had accepted without thought, a treasure glimpsed from a world away. As this story progresses, you find that true freedom was not in vast lands or bulging coffers, but in the liberty of choice, a concept unimaginable for the shackled souls of this age, a silent lament for a future that seemed impossibly distant, a sorrowful echo in the cavern of your soul. The constant ache from ceaseless labor, the maddening irritation of parasite bites, these were mere trifles compared to the overarching, chilling terror that haunted every breath, the omnipresent specter of sickness. In this relentless age, death was not a distant, abstract concept, nor the solemn conclusion of a life well lived. It was a familiar, unwelcome companion, perpetually lurking in every shadowed corner, patiently biding its time, waiting for a single, fleeting moment of vulnerability to claim a life. Every dry cough, every fleeting sneeze carried with it an unspoken threat, transforming existence into a precarious gamble with the very fabric of fate, a dice roll where the stakes were impossibly high. As the sun, a reluctant golden disk, began to climb the bruised medieval sky, casting long, wavering shadows across the muddy pathways of the village, you noticed a subtle shift in the air, a tension that was as palpable as the lingering stench of the communal waste. A hush had fallen over the usual morning clamor, replaced by a low hum of hushed whispers and furtive glances. News traveled slowly in this world, carried by the wind and the worried faces of its inhabitants, but its impact was swift and brutal. Old Mother Ilara, the gentle soul who usually offered you a half-smile, was absent from her doorway. Instead, a grim-faced neighbor stood guard, her eyes swollen with unshed tears. The unseen fear of epidemic hung heavy in the air,
a silent, pervasive ghost that perpetually hovered over every thatched roof, ready to descend at any moment, its cold breath promising widespread devastation. You soon learned of Mother Ilara's plight, a fever, a cough, a sudden weakness that had consumed her like a hungry flame. In your world, a simple antibiotic, a fever reducer, perhaps a visit to an urgent care clinic would have been the commonplace remedies. Here, there was no modern medicine, no miracle pills to soothe the raging fires within. The understanding of illness was shrouded in a mist of superstition and ancient, often barbaric theories. They believed that ailments were caused by an imbalance of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, fluids that supposedly governed the body's health. It was a philosophy as intricate as it was flawed, leading to terrifyingly simplistic and often deadly cures. You witnessed the desperate treatments, methods that would make a modern medical professional shudder in horror. The most common was bloodletting, a ritual as ancient as fear itself, performed with the conviction of absolute truth. A local healer, more often than not the village barber, or perhaps a blacksmith with a steady hand, would make a small incision in a vein, allowing the bad blood to drain, hoping to restore the delicate balance. You saw them apply leeches, slimy, black creatures to the skin, their bloated bodies slowly filling with the life force, a horrifying spectacle designed to draw out the perceived illness. You watched, helpless, as a young man, weakened by a persistent fever, had leeches applied to his neck, his already pale skin turning an ashen gray. His family looked on with hopeful, desperate eyes, clinging to the belief that this grotesque ritual would save him. Your stomach churned, knowing that this cure was more likely to hasten his demise, to weaken an already fragile system, rather than offer salvation. The tools of these healers were as terrifying as their methods. Filthy instruments, rested and unsterilized, were passed from patient to patient, silent carriers of the very diseases they purported to cure. A single dull knife, used for shaving and bleeding, would be wiped cursorily on a greasy rag before being applied to another trembling patient. The thought of unseen bacteria, of viruses spreading like wildfire from one sick body to the next, made your skin crawl. Even a seemingly minor cold could lead to death here, a simple sniffle escalating into a raging pneumonia, a common cough transforming into a consumption that slowly withered the body away. You realized that every ache, every cough, every faint tremor was a dance with destiny, a silent prayer that the disease would pass you by, leaving you for another day, another victim. You watched a neighbor, a sturdy farmer named Tom, clutching his stomach, his face a grotesque mask of pain, his complexion turning a chilling, bruised purple. His family huddled around him, their faces a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Instead of seeking practical remedies or even the questionable herbal concoctions of the village wise woman, they vehemently insisted that his agony was caused by an evil spirit possessing him. The entire village gathered, a somber, silent crowd, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of a small bonfire. They scattered salt around Tom's prone body, whispered ancient incantations, and burned pungent herbs, their smoke curling into the dim air like desperate pleas to unseen deities. All the while, the relentless pain continued to gnaw at Tom's insides, a physical torment deaf to their spiritual supplications. Then a quack doctor appeared, a shadowy figure with a mysteriously knowing look in his eyes, his rough clothes barely concealing an air of self-importance. He announced, with a theatrical flourish, that he would exorcise the evil spirits from Tom's body. His chosen method? To administer a dark, bitter liquid so foul that the mere sight of it made your stomach revolt. You watched as Tom, weak and delirious, was forced to swallow the potion, his body convulsing in protest. The scene was a grotesque ballet of desperation and delusion. This heartbreaking naivety, in your eyes as a visitor from the future, was the ultimate irony. On the very precipice of death, humanity clung fiercely to the most fantastical of illusions, clinging to belief as a drowning man clings to a straw. You saw countless lives extinguished by what, in your own time, would be considered trivial ailments. A relentless fever, a persistent cough, a bout of debilitating diarrhea. These were not the grand, dramatic deaths of legend, but the quiet, agonizing departures caused by a lack of understanding, a lack of sanitation, and a complete absence of effective treatment. The sheer helplessness of witnessing such preventable suffering was a burden almost as heavy as the physical discomforts you endured. It was like watching a slow-motion tragedy, unfolding day after day, with no power to intervene. The children, bright-eyed but often sickly, played amidst the filth, their innocent laughter echoing against the backdrop of constant microbial threat. You wondered how many of them would reach adulthood, how many would succumb to the unseen enemies lurking in every water source, every unwashed hand, every unvented shack. Their resilience was astounding, yet it was a resilience born of necessity, of ignorance, a fragile shield against an overwhelmingly hostile world. The concept of prevention, of vaccination, or even basic germ theory was a celestial secret hidden from these suffering souls. As night once again descended, wrapping the village in its cool, dark embrace, the persistent ache of your own body seemed a minor discomfort compared to the chilling echoes of the day's observations. You closed your eyes, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks in the shack walls, a mournful lament for countless departed souls. And you wondered, with a heavy heart, how many lives had flickered out in agonizing pain, in profound ignorance, desperately yearning for a healing touch they would never receive, longing for a peaceful, dreamless sleep undisturbed by the relentless specter of disease. This part of the journey reveals that true health was a blessing, not a given, a silent prayer for deliverance, a precious gift that few in this brutal age could ever truly hope to possess. In this unyielding, shadowed world, where every breath felt like a fragile loan, you began to grasp a truth more profound and more heartbreaking than any physical hardship. Half of its populace bore a destiny even more unforgiving, more relentlessly cruel. These were the women, silent pillars of a society that offered them little voice, little choice. Their lives were not merely a struggle for survival, a daily dance with hunger and disease. They were a relentless shouldering of an inescapable future, a crushing burden of inheritance passed down through generations, as if each woman was a silent warrior, bearing upon her weary shoulders the very lineage of humanity and an untold ocean of nameless pains. From the moment a girl child drew her first shaky breath in this era, her future was already woven into the rough fabric of her society, a predetermined tapestry of labor and obligation. You saw it in the eyes of the young girls, barely past infancy, already learning to mend clothes, to churn butter, to tend the smaller garden patches. There was an unspoken understanding, a resigned acceptance of their lot in life, etched onto their innocent faces like premature wrinkles. They grow up fast, these children of the Middle Ages, their childhoods a fleeting whisper, swallowed whole by the demands of survival. The usual joyous cacophony of youthful play was muted, replaced by the low hum of constant work, their hands calloused before their spirits had fully blossomed. Their eyes, though bright with the flicker of youthful curiosity, held a certain gravity, a premature weariness that spoke volumes about the world they inhabited. The moment a girl reached adolescence, often as young as 14 or 15, scarcely beyond childhood, her fate was sealed with marriage contract. This was not a union born of whispered affections or shared dreams, but a pragmatic alliance between families, a transaction of land, livestock, or future progeny. You witnessed the solemn, often tear-stained faces of these young brides, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and naive hope as they were led to the altar, exchanged like valuable commodities. Their primary purpose, their ultimate contribution to the village, was to bear children, endlessly, relentlessly. Pregnancy was a constant state, a cycle of conception, gestation, and agonizing childbirth that began in their youth and stretched, often until their bodies simply gave out. You saw women with lines of childbirth etched around their eyes, their bodies prematurely aged, carrying an infant in their arms, a toddler clinging to their skirts, and another life stirring within their weary wombs. It was a relentless conveyor belt of life, each new birth a testament to their unwavering, often unacknowledged strength. As a wife, her existence was defined by absolute submission. Her husband was her lord, his word law. There was no education for her, no parchment to scrawl upon, no learned texts to decipher. Her classroom was the hearth, the field, the birthing bed. Her knowledge was practical, inherited: how to spin wool, how to bake bread, how to soothe a feverish child with ancient remedies. Her days were a relentless grind, a brutal ballet of physical exertion. Her shoulders were perpetually bent under the weight of her dual roles: the tireless homemaker, churning butter and weaving cloth, and the equally tireless field worker, toiling beside her husband under the indifferent sun. She was the very bedrock of the family, the silent engine that kept the household running, a beast of burden in human form. But the most harrowing aspect of a woman's life, the true lottery with death, was the act of childbirth itself. Each passing through the Narrows, as they called it, was a terrifying gamble with life and death, a journey into the unknown where the odds were stacked heavily against survival. There was no prenatal care, no wise woman offering advice on nutrition or health during pregnancy. The concept was as foreign as flying. There were no soothing medicines, no anesthesia to dull the searing primal agony. The birthing chamber was often nothing more than the cramped, dark corner of a hut, attended by an older woman or a nervous neighbor. You heard the screams, muffled by thick walls but still chillingly distinct, echoing through the night, a symphony of terror and pain that spoke of lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. It was a brutal, often fatal rite of passage, a testament to raw courage and unimaginable suffering. Many women simply vanished from the village landscape after a particularly difficult birth, their lives extinguished like candles in a sudden gust of wind, leaving behind a wailing infant and a grieving family. You felt a profound sense of being trapped within this relentless cycle of fate, It was as if, even as an observer from another time, the threads of their predetermined lives began to weave themselves around your own spirit. You saw the tiny, fragile infants, their cries weak and often short-lived, and ached with the knowledge that their childhoods, if they survived, would be devoid of joy, filled with the harsh realities of labor and perpetual scarcity. They would grow up not with the freedom to explore or learn, but with the burden of survival, their hands accustomed to the plow long before they knew the pleasure of play.
You overheard the hushed, terrified whispers about women accused of witchcraft, their only crime often being a slight deviation from the norm, a sharp tongue, an unusual birthmark, or perhaps simply being too old, too poor, too desperate. A barren woman might be blamed for a failed harvest. A wise old woman who used herbs for healing might be seen as communing with dark forces. These were not mere rumors, they were deadly pronouncements, often leading to public trials and agonizing deaths. The fear of being different, of standing out in any way, was a suffocating pressure, forcing women into a conformity that was as stifling as their coarse wool garments. As night deepened and the flickering embers in the hearth cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the lingering cold, you found yourself sitting silently by the small, grimy opening that served as a window. The persistent chill seemed to seep into your bones, mirroring the chill of your thoughts. Questions, heavy and relentless, circled in your mind like nocturnal birds. Is this truly all there is? Can my life or any life here hold any meaning beyond the endless cycle of childbirth and labor until death claims me? You remembered the bedtime stories your mother used to tell, tales of princesses rescued by valiant knights, of brave queens ruling kingdoms, of women finding love and happiness beyond the confines of their immediate world. Tears, hot and unexpected, traced paths down your dirt-streaked cheeks. But these weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of profound understanding, of empathy for the voiceless women around you, and of a deep, silent yearning for something more. A faint flicker of hope, stubborn as a weed pushing through cracked stone, ignited within you. Despite the overwhelming harshness of this life, the human spirit, you realized, possessed an incredible, almost miraculous capacity to find a private corner for dreams, to yearn for something better, something beautiful, even if only within the sanctuary of one's own mind. You lay there, your heart heavy with contemplation, the rough straw of your bed a stark reminder of your present reality. The women of the Middle Ages were, you realized, largely voiceless, denied any real choice in their destinies, their roles dictated by ancient customs and an unforgiving patriarchy. Yet they were the very foundation of existence, the unyielding keepers of the sacred flame of family and lineage. Their silent sacrifices, their ceaseless toil, their quiet endurance, these were not insignificant acts. They were a poignant, often tragic epic, meticulously written not in ink, but in the sweat of their brow and the tears that fell silently onto the unforgiving earth. You recognized, with a clarity that pierced your soul, the profound, immeasurable value of equality and the freedom that you, a creature of the future, had once possessed with such effortless grace, a gift you had never truly cherished until now. As this journey unfolds, the indomitable resilience of the human spirit, especially that of women, shines through even the darkest ages, a testament to an enduring, unquenchable hope that flickers even in the deepest shadows. In this desolate, unyielding world, where the very thread of life felt impossibly fragile, You quickly comprehended a chilling truth. The concept of law was not a shield designed to protect the vulnerable, but a sharpened blade, poised to descend upon anyone at any fleeting moment, often without warning. Justice here possessed no balanced scales, no blindfold of impartiality. It was wielded solely by the heavy hand of brute strength, and stained by the dark crimson of blood. You found yourself a reluctant spectator in a grotesque theater of human suffering, where sentences were not meticulously weighed by evidence, but roared into existence by the frenzied cries of a bloodthirsty crowd. And the elusive truth was often a minor, forgotten detail, buried beneath the clamor of accusation and public spectacle. The air in the village, thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and perpetual damp, often carried the metallic tang of fear. You observed with a growing sense of unease that brutal acts were commonplace, a casual part of the daily tapestry. A quick, violent argument over a spilled ale, a dispute over a lost chicken, could escalate with terrifying speed into a bloody brawl, often settled not by reason, but by brute force and the swift swing of a wooden club. Crime was rampant, a festering wound on the body of society, fueled by desperation and unchecked power. Petty theft, violence born of hunger, and even darker deeds unfolded with a chilling regularity, whispered about in hushed tones, yet accepted as an inevitable consequence of their harsh existence. The punishments, when they came, were not designed for rehabilitation or understanding. They were engineered for maximum public spectacle and agonizing deterrent. They were merciless and brutal, a chilling testament to a time when cruelty was considered a legitimate instrument of control. You had heard the grim tales, whispered like cautionary lullabies. A thief's hand severed with a single swift blow of an axe left bleeding in the town square as a stark warning. A blasphemer's tongue pierced with a hot iron, silencing their words forever, transforming their very speech into a source of excruciating pain. For minor infractions, or as a form of public humiliation, some were forced to wear a scald's bridle or brank, an iron mask designed to shame, often fitted with a tongue plate that prevented speech, transforming the wearer into a silent, grotesque spectacle of public scorn. You shuddered at the thought, realizing that this was not merely punishment, it was a theatrical display of terror designed to impress upon the populace the absolute power of the Lord and the terrifying consequences of defiance. The concept of judicial process, as you knew it, was a foreign language here. Instead, judgment was often passed through a series of barbaric ordeals, trials by divine intervention. If you were accused, your fate might rest upon your ability to withstand the unyielding forces of nature or the agonizing touch of fire and water. You might be forced to plunge your arm into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a small stone, your guilt or innocence determined by how your skin healed or didn't. Or you might be thrown into a river, bound hand and foot. If you sank, you were innocent and likely drowned, but if you floated, you were deemed guilty, for the pure water had rejected you. These were not tests of truth or evidence, but cruel gambles with fate, leaving you with a profound sense of helplessness. How could justice prevail when divine intervention was the only witness? The most chilling aspect was the public executions, grotesque spectacles performed for the benefit of the populace. They were not somber affairs, but grim festivals, drawing crowds from miles around. You witnessed one such event in the central square, the gallows standing stark against the gray sky, a silent, menacing sentinel. The cheering of the crowd as the condemned man was brought forth was a raw, visceral sound, a terrifying symphony of morbid curiosity and righteous indignation. It wasn't the sound of sorrow, but of collective release, of a community affirming its own precarious morality. It was a brutal, undeniable reminder of how cheaply life was valued here and of the razor-thin line between a respected citizen and a condemned criminal. The faces in the crowd, some grim, some indifferent, some almost ecstatic, burned into your memory, a silent testament to a society desensitized by constant exposure to violence.
You felt a constant, gnawing sense of insecurity, a chilling realization that the law was not a benevolent guardian, but merely an instrument in the hands of the powerful. There was no due process, no presumption of innocence. The mere whisper of an accusation, fueled by jealousy, malice, or even a simple misunderstanding, could condemn you without a chance to defend yourself. The thought of being falsely accused, of standing alone before a mob, with no one to plead your case, was a cold dread that clung to you like the persistent medieval damp. You were a stranger in a strange land, without family or standing, a prime target for arbitrary justice. You overheard hushed conversations about minor quarrels that spiraled into bloody feuds, a single insult leading to a fatal blow, a misplaced word sparking a lifetime of enmity. It was a world where grudges festered, where vengeance was a sacred duty, and where even the smallest spark could ignite a wildfire of violence. The lack of formal dispute resolution, of impartial arbitration, meant that personal grievances often became bloody affairs, settled by the strength of arms rather than the power of reason. One day you witnessed a truly horrifying scene. A young man, barely older than a boy, was caught attempting to steal a loaf of bread from a merchant's stall, his eyes wide with the hunger you understood intimately. He was beaten mercilessly in the public square, a brutal, visceral spectacle of raw power. His cries echoed across the cobblestones, mingling with the jeers of some onlookers and the grim silence of others. As you watched, your stomach churning, a profound question resonated within you, a question that transcended time and place. Is this truly justice? Or was it merely a grotesque performance of power and fear, a theatrical display designed to crush dissent and enforce obedience? Then your thoughts drifted to your own world, a world of gleaming courthouses, of meticulous legal codes, of lawyers arguing for the accused, of judges striving for impartiality. Have we, in my modern world, you mused, with our fair courts and transparent laws, truly escaped this law of the jungle? Or, you pondered with a sudden, unsettling realization, is modern justice sometimes merely a more sophisticated, more insidious form of injustice, cloaked in complex legal jargon and bureaucratic procedures? The answer, you knew, was not as simple as you once believed. It was a disturbing thought, a persistent, unsettling whisper in your mind, reminding you that the veneer of civilization could be thin, easily cracked by the underlying currents of power and human fallibility. As night deepened, bringing with it a temporary hush, the echoes of vows, of weeping, and of frenzied cheers still reverberated within the chambers of your mind, a chilling symphony of medieval life. You realized with a heavy heart that justice was not always a beacon of clarity, not a shining truth. It was often shrouded in darkness, distorted by power, and its true cost, The price paid for a fragile semblance of peace was sometimes unbearably high, written in the tears and blood of the innocent. A profound sense of helplessness crept over you, a cold, unwelcome guest, as you acknowledged that no matter the era, humanity was perpetually engaged in a relentless struggle with the elusive concept of fairness, an endless battle that transcended centuries. This segment of your journey whispers a chilling truth. Justice, in any age, is a fragile, often elusive dream, a constant test of humanity's true nature, and a relentless mirror reflecting our deepest flaws.
You had endured the gnawing hunger, the relentless parasites, the body's ceaseless ache, and the brutal weight of unending labor. Yet, as the medieval night deepened its embrace around you, a more subtle, more pervasive force began to assert its dominance: the Church. In this dimly lit age, the spiritual realm was not merely a facet of life, it was the very air they breathed, shaping not only their eternity, but their every earthly breath, their every unspoken thought, and every trembling action. Here, the dictates of faith, as interpreted by the esteemed spiritual authority, were not suggestions, but commandments carved into the very bedrock of existence, guiding their behavior, their morality, and their understanding of themselves in a way that your modern mind, so accustomed to individual autonomy and secular reason, found both awe-inspiring and profoundly unsettling. The first rays of the morning, timid and hesitant, would not stir the villagers to the fields, but often to the house of worship. The daily observances were not just communal gatherings, they were the rhythmic heartbeat of their existence, a solemn pact with the divine. You observed the villagers, their faces etched with a blend of reverence and fear, kneeling on the cold, hard earth, their heads bowed low in supplication. The spiritual leader, his voice a sonorous drone in the echoing nave, spoke in a sacred tongue, a language understood by precious few, yet its very mystery lent it a profound authority. His gestures were precise, his robes a splash of rich color against the drabness of their lives, and in his hands symbolic elements were transformed into powerful conduits of divine grace, a miracle, palpable and terrifyingly real. This was not just belief, it was a visceral, undeniable truth that bound them together, a common language of the soul that transcended the squalor of their daily lives. The Church, you quickly realized, was the undisputed architect of their moral universe. Every action, every thought, was meticulously categorized as either a virtue or a transgression, meticulously weighed against the demanding scales of divine judgment. The fear of eternal consequence was a living, breathing entity, a chilling presence that stalked their waking hours and haunted their deepest dreams. It was a terror far greater than any earthly punishment, for its consequences stretched beyond the grave into an eternity of unimaginable suffering. You heard the hushed confessions whispered in darkened corners, the desperate pleas for forgiveness, the frantic attempts to atone for misdeeds. A stolen apple, a whispered lie, a moment of impure thought, all carried the same terrifying weight, for they could imperil the immortal soul. This pervasive sense of potential transgression directly influenced their daily conduct. You saw men, hardened by years of toil, tremble at the spiritual leader's sermons on self-indulgence or idleness.
Women, whose lives were an endless testament to sacrifice, fretted over moments of envy or vanity. The slightest deviation from the established spiritual code could ignite a storm of self-reproach, leading to fervent prayers, rigorous fasts, or even acts of penance, all in a desperate attempt to cleanse the soul. It was a society built on a collective, profound sense of spiritual accountability, constantly seeking redemption. The weight of this spiritual burden was immense, a constant pressure to conform, to obey, to appease a powerful, ever-watching divine presence. Your own modern concept of individual morality, of right and wrong defined by personal ethics, felt impossibly flimsy in comparison to this all-encompassing, externally imposed framework. The Church also dictated the very fabric of their social order. It was a hierarchical system, mirroring the celestial structure, with the highest spiritual authority at its apex. Beneath him, a vast, intricate network of clergy reached into every hamlet, every hovel. Disobeying the Church was not merely a religious transgression, it was an act of rebellion against the established order, against divine will itself. You witnessed disputes, even seemingly mundane ones, being brought before the local spiritual leader for arbitration. His judgment, often drawing from sacred texts and ecclesiastical law, was rarely questioned, for challenging it was akin to challenging divine decree. Even the Lord, with all his earthly power, often sought the Church's blessing for his endeavors, knowing that spiritual authority held a sway even his armies could not command. Beyond the grand pronouncements, the Church's influence permeated the smallest, most intimate aspects of life. It defined marriage, dictating whom one could marry, how one should conduct marital relations, and the sacred purpose of procreation. It shaped family life, emphasizing obedience to elders and patriarchal authority, mirroring the divine order. It even dictated the rhythm of the year, with countless holy days, periods of fasting, and special observances interrupting the arduous cycle of labor. These were not just religious observances, they were crucial social events, moments of communal gathering, albeit often somber and penitent, offering fleeting respite from the daily grind.
You saw acts of profound charity, born from genuine religious fervor. The wealthier landowners would sometimes donate land to monastic orders, seeking divine favor. Villagers, despite their own poverty, would offer meager alms to the Church, believing it was an investment in their eternal well-being. The sick and the infirmed found their only refuge in the spiritual institution's infirmaries, cared for by dedicated individuals driven by piety, even if their medical methods were rudimentary. This duality was striking, the crushing fear of transgression, balanced by the profound acts of compassion, all stemming from the same deep well of faith. Yet this unwavering faith also bred an almost blinding credulity. The line between miracle and superstition was incredibly thin, often non-existent. Sacred objects believed to possess divine power were highly revered. A fragment of a revered individual's garment, a piece of a blessed cross, even a lock of a holy person's hair, these were believed to offer protection, to heal the sick, to intercede with the divine. Pilgrimages, arduous journeys to distant shrines, were undertaken by thousands, driven by the desperate hope for a cure, for forgiveness, for a glimpse of the sacred. You witnessed a sick woman, barely able to walk, embark on a perilous journey to a distant spiritual center,
clinging to the belief that touching a holy relic would restore her health. Her conviction was absolute, her suffering a mere prelude to what she believed would be a divine intervention. For your rational mind, this boundless faith in the unseen felt both astonishing and terrifying, a powerful testament to the human need for meaning and control in an uncontrollable world. The stories of devout individuals and martyrs, their lives a testament to unwavering devotion and miraculous deeds, were the epic tales of this era, far more compelling than any earthly adventure. These were the heroes and heroines of their world, their sacrifices celebrated, their virtues emulated. Their stories, often fantastical and imbued with divine intervention, shaped the aspirations and moral compasses of the common folk. You understood that these narratives served a vital purpose. They provided role models, offered comfort in suffering, and reinforced the spiritual institution's teachings through vivid, memorable examples. As the final embers of the hearth died down, leaving your small hut in oppressive darkness, a profound silence descended, broken only by the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets. You lay there, contemplating the invisible chains that bound these people, not just to the land, not just to their lords, but to a spiritual framework that permeated every fiber of their being. The concept of free will, as you knew it, seemed almost non-existent, overshadowed by the constant, overwhelming imperative of divine judgment. You reflected on how, in your modern world, the individual was often the arbiter of their own morality, building their ethical framework brick by brick, sometimes faltering, sometimes succeeding. Here, the framework was pre-built, towering and unshakable, leaving little room for deviation. The sheer mental fortitude required to navigate such a world, to constantly measure one's life against an unseen, all-powerful judge, was immense. It was a survival of the spirit, a constant negotiation with eternal consequences. You wondered, as your own mind wrestled with these profound differences, if true freedom lay not in the absence of rules, but in the power to choose which rules to follow. The deepest night finally settled, a velvet shroud over the medieval world, bringing with it a stillness that was almost absolute. And you realized that despite the relentless harshness of life, despite the pervasive fear and the crushing weight of ignorance, humanity always found a way to endure, to cling to a fragile thread of hope, and to perpetually dream of a better tomorrow, even if that tomorrow remained tantalizingly out of reach. Now, as this extraordinary journey through the echoes of time gently concludes, you can truly appreciate the myriad, often unseen gifts of your present existence, every precious breath, every rhythmic beat of your heart a sacred inheritance from generations who dreamed of such peace. Let the lingering thoughts of that distant, arduous past dissolve into the ethereal currents of the air and allow yourself to sink into a deep, untroubled slumber, a peace that the people of the Middle Ages could only, agonizingly dream of, a profound and eternal comfort they never knew. This entire journey has been a whisper from the past, a poignant reminder of the precious gift of your present, and an enduring invitation to embrace the profound serenity of slumber, a blessing beyond measure. And now, as the final pages of this journey through time gently closes, I truly hope you found serenity in each story, each reflection on a world long past. Thank you for joining me on this wondrous voyage, for listening to the whispers of history. If these echoes of the past have touched your heart, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe, so we may continue exploring untold mysteries together. Share your thoughts below, like a star twinkling in the night. allowing this journey of discovery to forever continue. Wishing you the most peaceful slumber.